You are listening to the Adapt Performance Podcast, where we aim to make elite level strength and conditioning accessible to everybody. I'm your host, Jordan Webster, and let's get into the episode. Yes, guys, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Adapt Performance Podcast. So in this episode, it is going to be part two, or take two of rapid fire questions, where I'm going to give myself 90 seconds to answer some of the great questions that you guys sent over that I harvested from Instagram. So I got loads of questions. I got some great questions, which I think speaks to the good quality feedback that I got from the first time that I did this. You guys seem to enjoy it, which is awesome. So if you enjoy this one, let me know, and it just means that I'll do more of them. Some of the questions that I got were sick, really good ones, and definitely some questions in there that I think, look, I would have to spend a long period of time talking about, thinking about, and researching about in order to do an amazing job of answering this question. So the fact that I'm giving myself 90 seconds and realistically riffing it a little bit, I've done a little bit of reading around just to make sure I, give a somewhat educated opinion. But yeah, be kind is all I'm trying to say here. Be kind to me. Right. So the idea is, I'm going to give myself 90 seconds after I read out the question, but also probably going to give some background information on the question just so it saves me a bit of time. So the first one I'm going to go with is a doozy, and it is relative energy. I'll go again. Relative energy deficiency in sport, the potential over-awareness of it in female athletes and the prevalence of it in male athletes. The restricted research base that absolute points of view are formed from. So yeah, it kind of, tees me up for a topic, not necessarily a specific question, but just to give some background information on what REDS is, if people aren't aware of it, is the idea that low energy availability, so essentially under eating relative to the amount of exercise that you are doing and the impact that has on bodily processes such as bone health, cardiovascular health, immune function, well-being, and performance probably. So it's the idea that, eating disordered or disordered eating and the impact that has on, health. Right. So give myself 90 seconds to speak about this. And we are in. Yeah, so my personal view on this, after you asking the question, because genuinely just hadn't really thought about it, so it was not in my mind. When I was going through university, the female athlete triad, which is the relationship between menstruation or, menstruation that isn't functioning normally, in quotations, disordered eating and bone density. So those three things and the impact that it has on a female athlete due to low energy availability. So that was being spoken about an awful lot back then. And it seems like REDS has become a little bit more of an evolved version, a rebranded version of the triad, in my opinion. I think because of, in my opinion, where REDS has come from the female athlete triad, it is more geared towards female athletes. And, if we kind of look at the general stereotypes of society, I do think female athletes, it is more spoken about around disordered eating and things like that. Definitely in the athletes that I've coached, I think about school, I think about the teams that I've been within, it's always kind of a hot topic, whereas men, it doesn't get spoken about pretty much at all. And they're probably less likely to speak about it as well because it's linked into, the mental health side of things. Therefore, I don't think it gets spotted. I think for me, working a lot more in combat sports, I definitely just see the signs of disordered eating all the time. You constantly see it and it's really hard to ignore it. But I think with a lot of contentious topics, let's say, or topics that are really important, but ultimately have a lot of gray areas, it's a little bit of a pendulum swinging back and forth. And in order to highlight one specific population that is going through a thing, there is the other population that gets missed, and therefore it's kind of like this finger pointing situation if they don't receive it. I would love to see more research done into disordered eating and the associated effects of REDS in male athletes, 100%. So definitely can't go super deep into that question. It's not an area I'm an expert in by any means, and like I said, hadn't even really thought about the male side of this specific question. So look, that's the first one out the way. You tried to set me up with that one just to watch me squirm, so congratulations, Gary. Second one then, one that's really close to my heart. So how would you improve the 9-in-1 White Monster energy product? Right. So it's a meme, right? It's a joke. If you haven't seen the picture, I will send it. But essentially, it's the idea that a play on the fact that men use shampoo and conditioner that does 15 different things, and we're just so simple. So the Monster Energy one is shampoo, conditioner, body wash, soap, lotion, pre-workout, protein, creatine, and testosterone. So how would I improve it? How would I improve the 9-in-1? You're going to have to hear me out. It's going to seem like a wacky idea. I would go 10-in-1, right? I'd go 10-in-1, maybe 11-in-1, but I don't want to confuse the market too much. I'm pretty shit at refilling my screen wash in my car, okay? I'm terrible at it. In fact, I'm always lead there with like windows that are just a bit blurry. It's my big downfall. It's probably my toxic trait. So I think screen wash, I think every man's going to be a little bit like, hell yeah, we need that. We need it on the market. So I'm going to trademark it. It's an Adapt product or a collaboration between Monster Energy, of course. But the 11-in-1 is actually low-calorie frying oil for your eggs, for your steak, or halloumi, right? So I think that would be like the perfect blend. 9-in-1's good, but 11-in-1, we're actually talking now. So that's how I'd make it better. It's science-backed, okay? I think it'd take over the world a little bit. There we go. Next one. How should my training differ on fight week to a normal training week for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Great question, okay? So let me dig into this. If you are seeing this fight or this match as more of a development match, an opportunity to gain experience, I know you're always gaining experience, but if it's one of those things where you're doing enough matches throughout a year, you might not want to sacrifice specific training time in order to taper into this competition. Obviously, we want to feel decently fresh. We don't want to go into this fight feeling fucked. However, if you have 52 matches a year and it's basically every weekend, then you don't have the time to taper or do a big taper. Therefore, it's just worth kind of operating at a little bit more of a sustainable level. But what I will say is everybody's different in terms of how they want to approach going into a fight, a match, or whatever. Okay, some people really like to push through and even up the intensity in fight weeks, such as shark tanks, and just really pushing the pace. It's where they derive confidence from. They know that if they can survive that final week, which is super hard, they're then going to be in a great situation and they'll just feel good about themselves come the actual competition. So it kind of silences some of the psychological factors, which can definitely be a huge detriment to people. Okay. But I personally think that last week, definitely train hard if you want to, but I think it should be used for quality, not quantity. So specific drilling, picking good rounds that really give you an opportunity to work on the things you want to work with, have great rest times within it so you can keep the quality nice and high. For me, that's that. If you want to do the shark tanks and stuff like that, I think do it in the week before fight week would be my thoughts. Because then if something goes wrong, that's the thing. If you pick up an injury, you dislocate a toe, a finger or whatever, and it's like, last thing you needed, even though, a week might not change too much, I do think it would make a big difference. So how would I adjust things? I just think you taper back a bit. I think you do a little bit less volume. I think you do higher quality rounds, and I think you're more selective with your rolling partners so that you don't risk it too much. Okay. That'd be my answer there, one, but I think that's a great question. Next one, what makes a world-class strength and conditioning coach? And what makes a successful strength and conditioning coach? What are the differences? Okay, so let's get into this then. Look, I think the difficulty for me with this question is getting into the definition of the terms between, what a world-class versus successful is. If we was to try and loosely define a successful strength and conditioning coach as somebody that generally satisfies tasks and results relevant to their role, such as, player or athlete availability for their sport, making some performance improvements, collaborating with the wider performance team in order to, help performance outcomes. But you might occasionally make a mistake. I would say that is a successful strength and conditioning coach. So somebody that is able to knit together all of the key relevant skills of their role, like communication, knowledge of the sport, anatomy, sports science, training principles, etc. So it's kind of like, is a world-class strength and conditioning coach all of those things, but is somebody that is linked, that is working with a high-level athlete? I don't think so. I don't think it really has to do with the actual athlete. I think it's more to do with the coach and how they operate. Okay. I think it's more to do with their ability to think at a higher level, operate at a higher level, and deal with those challenges. But I think one of the things for me, the difference between, somebody that's successful or somebody that's like a super world class is the idea that the details that make somebody an expert, or the details of the somebody, let me go again. So the details are the things that make somebody an expert. And that is only really developed through hours of time on task. So it's the experience, it's being put in different scenarios. It's time on task. You can't be an expert after a year on the job. In one scenario, working with the same type of athlete, using the same tools, I think it comes from variety. Okay, so yeah, that's my thoughts there. So what makes them different is I think that the skill level, and I say skill level, but ability to operate at a higher level and have deeper thought. Yeah, that's my thoughts there. Next one, how is my knee rehab? So for those of you that don't know, I had a jiu-jitsu comp 6 weeks ago. Didn't go well in the first 30 seconds. I tweaked my own knee. He didn't do anything. It was my fault. But it was going really well. So it was 6 weeks ago. I've done the last 2 weeks. I've done jiu-jitsu twice a week, just gradually building it up, just doing a little bit more each time. I did a few live sparring rounds the other day, which was cool, and did an MRI and all those types of things. And what it basically said is my LCL was a little bit angry, but it wasn't like knackered. The attachment point of my hamstring and quads on the outside of my knee, where it attaches to the lateral aspect and a little bit behind the knee, was angry as well. And then potentially something to do with meniscus. However, the MRI doesn't actually, cover that corner, which is great. But it's all good. However, I did tweak it yesterday. So we've got a dog, we've got a puppy, Izzy, and took her out for a walk yesterday. She was chewing on some litter, a bottle lid, so I grabbed it, went to put it in my pocket, and as I put it in my pocket, she absolutely sprints after this bird and she whips the lead out of my hand. And I'm like, no, she's, we've had her 6 weeks as well. So I sprint after her. I was sweating. I was proper like, fuck. So yeah, I've actually re-aggravated it a little bit. It's not super bad, but it's definitely sore today just from sprinting after Izzy, who's trying to make our life a living nightmare. But generally speaking, rehab's been good. I've done a good job up until that point of protecting it and gradually just giving it time. Had this little tweak not happened yesterday, I probably would have treated this next training week as normal, but we'll probably push that back a week or two. Yeah. Next question. Thanks for the question on that. Yeah, it's injuries are bollocks, but equally, what, you do a contact sport, you're going to get injuries. What do you expect? But equally, let's go one step further. You're a human being. You're made up of a mixture of soft tissue, tendons, ligaments, bone, muscle, all those types of things. You're going to get hurt at some point, whether you play a sport or not. So yeah, this is what it is. Next one is, why do boxers have big lats? Right. So yeah, this is an interesting one. And I think the first time I'd really had this question posed to me and kind of the answer was given to me as well by the S&C coach at GB Boxing at the time, Mark Campbell, is he seemed to think that it was due to the eccentric demand of punching. So when you throw a punch, you've got your lats, which are going to be one of the muscles that is going to stop your arm from fully just being pulled out of his socket. Okay, so there's always an element of tension being created, particularly when you think about the amount of punches that are thrown. Okay, it's not like you throw a punch and the lats are gripping on for dear life through every single part of that movement. But I do think it's a volume game. Even if there's just a little bit, you throw enough punches, you're probably going to get some activation of that muscle group. So yeah, I think that is probably my thoughts. I had a little look at, what the lats do and everything. And we're not truly sure how much the lats assist in stuff like rotation and lateral flexion. So it could be a little bit of a reach there to assume that those things do contribute to bigger lats. I think another thing is just questioning whether they do have big lats. Is it actually just the fact that they are super lean? Okay. And because they're so lean and the muscle is super prominent, it literally lifts off the rib cage and they've got that real turtle shell look about them. So that could be a factor. Another thing, generally speaking, the relative intensity of a chin up is super heavy. You're lifting all of your body weight. It might be easier to get some hypertrophy based benefits from in that target muscle group compared to a press up where it's like 66% of body weight, or a squat where it's even less. So maybe it's just one of those muscle groups that's just actually better trained because the boxer has done a little bit more of that type of exercise and it's, more stimulative. Maybe not. I think when I've been working with boxers more recently, I ask them about like PBs. They're generally not great at chin-ups and pull-ups. If you don't have a pull-up bar, you're pretty bollocksed. So, yeah, there's something. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and that kind of feeds us on to the next one, actually. Yes, guys, what is going on? Quick break in today's episode for me to remind you about ADAPT's online strength and conditioning coaching. Our mission really is to make elite level strength and conditioning accessible to everybody. And our service does exactly that. So you get access to everything: an elite level coach, physiotherapist, psychologist, nutritionist, a community to keep you engaged. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is give you everything you would ever need in order for you to achieve your goals. So if that is something that you are curious about, get in contact and we'll just have a no pressure chat where I explain everything, find out a little bit more about you, and we can decide whether you are a good fit for our program. Okay, without further ado, let's get back into the episode. Cheers. Is targeted hypertrophy. Is it possible or is it not possible? So I think for me, yeah, it's possible. I think by targeting specific muscle tissue, you are able to hypertrophy that specific muscle, and I think the lat question that was just prior to this kind of explains that. I think hypertrophying of specific muscle group will happen when you train it more. Just from doing a pull-up doesn't mean you're going to get calf hypertrophy and those types of things. And I think bodybuilding supports this, and I think research supports this. If it doesn't, like, point me in the direction of like conflicting information with this, because I'm really curious. I do think there are systemic benefits to general strength training, like hormonal changes and things like that, and neural benefits. So one of the questions that I've wondered in the past is, the idea of the cross-education effect, and the idea that when you get an injured limb, let's say left leg, which is injured, you train the right leg and it keeps adaptations around muscle mass around on the injured side. Okay, well, that kind of points to the idea of like, well, actually then targeted hypertrophy probably is possible, but it's just from targeting the muscle tissue itself doesn't mean that's the only way of achieving hypertrophy. So I've wondered those things. But yeah, I do think it's possible. I think you look at bodybuilding as the pure example of hypertrophy, and you will see specific athletes saying, okay, I brought up my back loads this year, but the rest of their body might look the same because they're aiming for a certain amount of symmetry, between muscle groups. So yeah, I think it's possible. But if you have other information on that, then send it my way, because I am keen. Cool. Next one: maintaining or improving rugby strength in season. Good question. Just before I get into this one, check out the episode that I did last week, where I basically outline stopping yourself from getting slower in season. And I'll probably speak about a lot of the same things here. So for a more in-depth touch on this, check out that one. But here we go. Look, I think part of the problem with people losing strength and speed and those types of things in season is the fact that they just try and plow through the season without any form of auto-regulation or trying to adjust their training based on how banged up you are. Okay, so you're going to pay for it. Like, you're going to run yourself into the ground because you're not changing things up. Like, after a heavy game and you still try and go do the same things that you were doing in off season or when you were feeling fresh, it's not going to end well. So I think you need to firstly have a correct weekly schedule set up, which is specific for you, how many minutes you get, your style of play, all those things, and how physically gifted you are. So I think you need to have the weekly schedule set up nice. I think you need to have a good idea of flexibility in general, and flexibility within how to adjust your training, how to auto-regulate, and make sure that you are, working to the person that you are that day, not who you were 3 weeks ago off the back of 2 weeks off. That's one of the things you need to kind of grasp. It like, who am I today, and what is the body I've got today, and I'm going to play towards that. I do think, generally speaking, 2 sets is enough for a lot of strength training based things, provided that you give it some good intensity. 3 sets is probably better, I'm not going to lie. However, 3 sets is sometimes a little bit too much and pushes you over the edge in terms of fatigue and soreness and those types of things. So we use a lot of 2-setters, particularly in lower body, where, I just think it's enough, particularly with how much on-feet volume the guys are getting that we work with. So yeah, that's how I would go about it. 2 sets, but be prepared to change things up. You want to make plan B as close to plan A as possible, but don't be so rigid, because rigid things break. Okay, great question. Another great question coming up, which is similar, I think, actually. So, should combat sports have dedicated seasons like other sports? Okay, so look, I think this kind of naturally happens. You'll have fight camps and you'll have off periods, and you do find that fighters and combat sports they'll work hard when they have something coming up, and then they'll back off when they don't. I would personally, generally speaking, like to see a little bit more balance between those two things because what we often see is a mismatch. You have like a feast or famine type of mentality where people will train super, super hard above a sustainable level. They'll redline it and above coming into their fight camp. Okay. Maybe pick up an injury. If they actually make it to the fight, that's amazing. But then after that point, because they've gone for it so, so hard, on the other side of that fight, they do very, very, very little. Okay. And that just means you've kind of got this huge up and down nature of it where like skill development takes a huge hit, physical development takes a huge hit in those off periods. And you need to recover, you need to live life, you need to take care of those things. But I think if there was a little bit more of a middle ground nature to it, I think that'd be better served for a lot of people. I think if you're a beginner or an amateur, I think you just need to find a sustainable level and just keep pushing through. Like I'm not a huge fan of huge fight camps for beginner athletes or amateur athletes because again, what I just said before, if you do a 12-week fight camp or an 8-week fight camp as an amateur, you're going to go through a horrible weight cut. You're going to, drive yourself into the ground, and then you're going to take 4 weeks off. I just don't think that's the best way of you collecting competition experience in order to really maximize skill level, physical attributes, and to just mature in the sport. If you're a pro, you tend to have, the highs and lows. That kind of happens. Sometimes you're at the mercy of fight shows and stuff like that as well. But yeah, I think it kind of naturally happens, in my opinion. I actually think there should be less seasons in amateur sport, whereas the professional side, I think they have a lot of other pressures that kind of impact it. So yeah, kind of danced around that question a little bit, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. If I could log into the Matrix, what S&C core skill would I want to upload so that I could become an expert suddenly in? Well, I've already given you the question of how I would be a full-blown entrepreneur and make the 9-in-1 Monster Energy better. But let's say I've already got that skill. Cool, right, we're in 90 seconds. So I think it depends. I was thinking about this one last night. It depends on what your idea of core skills are. Is it anatomy? Is it program writing? Demos, scientific underpinning, testing and monitoring, all those things. So if I had a list, I'd probably be able to better serve this, but I think the one that I would pick would be communication. Okay. I feel like if you're good enough at enough things, like all the other things that an S&C coach does, okay, if you're good enough at those, but you're extremely good at communicating, you're a good communicator, I think your ability to do good quality work will be ace. I think your ability to work within a team, speak to athletes, listen to athletes, that's the side of communicating people don't think about. When you think communicate, a lot of people think about talking. Well, it's conversation, it's a back and forth, it's a dance. I would go down communication. I think it's a huge skill. You then have written communication, verbal communication, body language is a part of communication. I think they're all wrapped up. A really nice quote that I like about this is the single biggest mistake with communication is the illusion that it had taken place. This is, when I first saw that, I was like, that's sick. I love it. And that's super paramount in bigger organizations where conversations happen in hallways. You don't get CC'd into an email, so you miss out on a piece of information that would have been, really important, or it might have allowed you to do your job a little bit better. But yeah, no, I think communication would just be sick. It's something that I actively try to work on. Literally doing a podcast like this is such an interesting challenge, and you'll get this because I know you've got your own podcast. Like doing these things is not easy. Sometimes you have to record a solo one 3 or 4 times because you fuck up a word. But yeah, that's what I'd go with. I think it'd just be sick. I'm not going to go for testing and monitoring or anything like that. That'd be my pick pretty much straight away as soon as I thought about it. Okay, we have got one final one then. Okay. Cold plunge and its effect on protein synthesis straight after training. Will it ruin my hypertrophy gains? So I will give a little bit of a backstory to this one. Like I rag on ice baths and cold plunge and stuff like that on Instagram, right? I do it more tongue in cheek for sure. Like I genuinely do see the benefits. I think they're a great thing to do. My problem with them, because I think it's super marketed, I think it's hot at the minute, is people will think that that is the key, and they will overinvest in that, and they'll put way more emotional effort and habituality, we'll go with that. They put more habit building resources towards, okay, I need to do a cold plunge, I'm like, fucking hell, you haven't eaten more than 50 grams of protein daily in weeks. Like, I just think it's one of those things that if you're doing everything else right, then do this. Cool. We need to use it at the right time, which we'll obviously get into. So yeah, and I know I put out a meme a while ago, which got a little bit of traction, a little bit of back and forth. A lot of people calling me a wanker. And a lot of people were saying, well, you should do both. Essentially, I had split the screen in two sides. I had like all the things that I approve of, evidence-based, like good sleep quality, good nutritional practice, load management, that type of thing, like the bread and butter stuff that's going to make up a huge percentage of you actually getting better. The other side was sport-specific exercises in quotations, functional movement in quotations, ice baths, stuff like that. And people were saying things like, well, you should just do both. And I'm like, yeah, in an ideal world, okay, do both. But what tends to happen is people don't do both. They invest too much in the stuff that is like more circusy and more hot and it's marketed. We're all impressionable, right? So I don't think people do both. They will lean more over to that other side, and then they'll start to neglect things like sleep. Okay, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. to do an ice bath. Yeah, fucking terrible idea. But anyway, so let me review the question then. That's my bias, right? So I'll put that out there. I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody else's eyes around my thoughts on it. Cold plunge and its effects on protein synthesis straight after training. Will it ruin my hypertrophy gains? Cool, we're in 90 seconds. So yeah, I do think it will ruin some of your hypertrophy gains. I think part of what cold plunge does, if people aren't aware, is it reduces some of the inflammation effect from training. And you do need inflammation. You need those responses in order to promote adaptations or some adaptations within the body. After having a little bit of a dig, so I wanted to make sure that I was putting out something that was actually worthwhile with this. It does seem to reduce hypertrophy, okay? But I still think you will see gains if you do it straight after a hypertrophy session, but I think they will be reduced, and I think as a natural lifter that isn't, enhanced, gains are going to be hard to come by. You've been lifting for a long amount of time, mate. Like, I would definitely avoid it, because even if it's a 1% difference, like that 1% adding up over a few years is going to be huge. And like, if we already look at what I would expect a natural lifter to be able to gain muscle mass wise over a year, if they're hammering their nutrition, their sleep and all those things, you look at bodybuilding, the purest example of that. If a natural lifter can gain like 3 pounds, 4 pounds over a year when they're adhering to like bulking, cutting and those types of things, that's not a lot. And let's assume that we're probably going to be a little bit less than that if we're not bulking, cutting, we're not living the lifestyle. And you go on holiday about 15,000 times a year. I've seen it on Instagram. So you definitely smash your fair share of sangria and shit. So yeah, mate, I would avoid it. Honestly, I just don't think it'd be worthwhile doing it for the benefits that you would get. Obviously, if you've got different goals, different athletic goals, then maybe that's a conversation. Obviously, if you enjoy it, okay, that's fine to do, but it might just be ruining the single most important thing that you're doing it for. Interestingly, though, when I was digging around, it did say that some of the research was kind of indicating towards it reduces hypertrophy or muscle mass, but not thought to impact strength gains as much if you do a cold plunge after a lifting session. And I thought, well, that's actually really interesting. So if we think about, I'm going to use combat sports as a perfect example here of like a weight class sport where we don't want, muscle mass increases for a lot of guys, but we do want huge amounts of strength. Well, maybe that's actually a really smart tactic, is like, well, we can go in, we can smash them with some high quality strength work, which in some cases probably is going to be a little bit hypertrophic. But if we get them in a cold plunge after, we might get all the good stuff without the bad stuff in quotations, which is the associated weight gain, which we wouldn't want. And first time I've seen that, first time I've thought about that, which was interesting. So I'm gonna think about it. I'm gonna try and do a little bit more reading around this, and just see if that's something to actually recommend. So combat sports and contact sports as well, like it seems to be hot in those because their body's pretty banged up, and cold does make it feel better and you feel a little bit less shit off the back of it. So there is all the questions I'm going to do today. All right. So I was about 30 minutes. Decent, smashed through them in a good amount of time. Did I stick to 90 seconds? Absolutely not. I was close, but I think I probably would have done a worse job of answering all those. Some really good questions. Really enjoyed them. I do think there's some of them I probably will do in bigger detail, so I can go into it, a little bit deeper. But like some of them, I'll probably have to do a little bit more research on those as well. But yeah, beautiful. If you've got any questions off the back of this, please do give us a shout. If you enjoyed this episode, also let me know. Like, that definitely means a lot. Just means that I'll carry on doing the stuff that you guys like, and I'll do less of the stuff that you guys do not like. So your feedback, good and bad, is always really appreciated. But yeah, hope you have a great rest of the day, great week, whatever you're doing. Continue to smash training, get after it. I'm going to go take the dog for a walk, not let her off the lead. And then I've got some zone 2 to do on the bike. So I'm going to do an hour of zone 2 on the bike. And then I've got a jiu-jitsu instructional that I'm currently watching. So I'll try and do a bit of studying at the same time. So trying to pair those two things to save time. But yeah, sweet. Got any questions? Give me a shout. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, that is the end of today's episode, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, please do let us know and then share it with somebody who may find this episode interesting. Okay, see you next time. Cheers.